We're gonna add some stuff in here. We're gonna add a model and some lighting. I want to set up a couple things. I just want to review a couple things. So in the previous lesson, I made this like room template, and then I made a bunch of rooms. And during the workshop period, I made a few more rooms. And one thing I just want to go over real quick is once you have a bunch of stuff, adding it in. I'm going to make a folder and call it rooms. So I'm going to edit this folder and rename it rooms. And my room is in there now because I had it selected when I made the folder, but if it's not for some reason, you'll see the folder has like no eyeball here. Just make sure you drag it in there, and if it's in the folder, you'll see this little arrow. And it's good to keep things nice and organized, because once I start adding a lot of rooms or like little room blocks, your outliner is going to get really busy. It's going to be hard to find stuff. So it's always good to add little folders, even though they're not quite as useful as the nodes in Godot. They are still useful for organization. So once I have a room, one thing that I want to point out, so when we were making the room, we didn't want to rotate stuff, but once you have the component, it's okay to rotate it. I don't think I mentioned that before. So let's say I'm designing my level a little bit, and I've got these different room guys that I'm working with. I made a couple other ones. So let's say I have this room with 2 doors. It's going to be a little bit easier to design this if I go into the wireframe view over here, so I can see how everything looks. I wasn't really using the wireframe view a lot, but when I go into wireframe view, I can just see how things line up a little bit easier. So when I first add it into the scene, it's not really lined up, but I can move it down here in this view, and then in this view I can kind of line it up this way. And then in this view, I can line it up this way. And when you're in the wireframe view, although it doesn't have to be wireframe, that's just the default, you can right click to pan the view around. And so I can get that lined up. Okay, so let's go back to the other view. I can't see the button over here. There we go. Okay, so right now I've got these 2 sections of my room. Actually, this is in the wrong place. Let's move this over here. And they line up nicely. But I made another version of the room. I'm really bad at moving around in Unreal because I don't use it that much. Okay, I made another version of the room, which is a turn. Okay, so there's my turn. Let's go down there and line it up. Okay. So that looks fine if I want to turn to the right, but let's say I wanted to turn to the left. I can rotate one of my components. I don't want to scale. I want to avoid scaling, but rotating is fine. So if I take this turn and I hit E to get rotation, I can just rotate it around like that. And when I make these little level scenes, they have this built-in little pivot thing somewhere in here. I don't see it, but it's in there somewhere. And so it'll know where to pivot from. And you can actually change that, but it's pivoting from the middle, so that's good. So I'll keep it like that. Okay. So another thing I want to just demonstrate real quick. I'm just going to put another of my starting points. So let's throw these rooms in the room folder. And this is my starting point. So let's duplicate this. So I'm going to hold the Option and drag this guy over here. And so we've got another room. I'm going to push this guy over here and then rotate it around like that. Okay, so now I've just got a really basic little level where I have a few different rooms and I can kind of walk over here. So one thing to keep in mind is if I edit the instance of one of the rooms, it's going to update the other rooms. So let's say, for example, I wanted to put some lighting, and we'll talk about some lighting in a second. So let's say I want to add some lighting into here. I could add the light just directly into the hierarchy. That would be good if I just want one light. So if I want to add some a light in here, I can go to the plus up here. And you can see there's a bunch of different things. We've mostly been using the content drawer, but there's also some basic stuff in here, like there's basic shapes. There's different sort of like components like actors and characters. And then there's lights. And there's a few different types of lights that behave in different ways. If you want to add some light just into one single little area, point light is good for that. So a point light is the most basic light. It just has a point in space, and light just goes outward from that point in every direction. So if I throw a point light in here, you can see the size of the light. So let's go down and throw it in here. Gonna move it up a little bit. I'm just gonna put it kind of in the center of this room. So that will just illuminate that area. And we have some, properties that we can change with the light. So the light has its own properties. It has a transform, obviously, to move it around. But it also has some properties like the intensity, so we can make it brighter or less bright. Let's make it a little brighter. And then we can change the color. So if we want to add sort of a nice little color into our scene, we can change the color there. Just hit OK. There's a bunch of other stuff in here, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can play around with those if you want. So now there's a light in this scene, but there's just one light here, which is, that's fine. But let's say you wanted to add something into every instance of this particular room. So let's delete this light. Let's open my rooms. And I'm going to go to the room with door. And I'll go to the details and click edit. And now I can still add in a light. So let's add in a point light again. And let's throw it in the middle of this first room here. Should go to wireframe view, but let's just get this up here. Okay, there's our light. Okay, so this is if I want to add the same thing into every room. It doesn't have to be a light. It could be, more walls or taller walls or whatever. But we've added this little light in here. Let's change the color so it's a little more obvious. So I'm going to change the color to something like that. Click OK. And I'll increase the intensity a little bit. Okay, so notice when I'm in this edit view, there's a new light right here. And when I exit, now there's another light over here. So it's going to update every instance of that room. So if you don't want the light to be in every room, you can just add it into the general hierarchy over here. But if you want to update every version of an instance, you can do it that way. Notice that it didn't update my other two rooms because those are separate files now. So you'd have to do those separately. But that's one way that we can update those instances. Okay, so we have some lights. Let's talk about the other light types that we can use. So besides the point light, that's the most simple light. The next kind of most simple light is the directional light. This is just a light, but it has a direction, but it doesn't have a point. So it's just going to be kind of a light that is applied to everything. And the default scene already has a directional light. This is kind of like the main light in the scene. So this is sort of like the sunlight. If we kind of play around with the parameters here, you'll see how it affects the rest of the scene. So if we turn up the intensity, the whole scene is going to be brighter or darker. So if we turn down the intensity, we'll have a dark scene, and the other lights will, show a lot more. And we can also change the color. So if it, let's say it's the sun is setting, and so we have maybe like a yellow or orangey sunlight, that's going to change the light in the entire scene. The more lighting you add into a scene, the more work the processor is doing to render all the graphics. So if you add a few lights, that's going to be fine. If you add like a million lights, it's going to start to slow down at a certain point. So directional light, so point light has a point, and no direction. It goes everywhere. Directional has no point. It just has a direction. So it throws light everywhere. And we already have one of those in the scene. The other lights we have are spotlight. This has a point and a direction. So you put it in a specific point and you point it at something. So if we put a spotlight in the scene, you'll see this is good for like a street lamp or, you know, some light that has a source. So maybe we have some little spotlights here to illuminate these areas. And of course you can, you know, change the color, change the intensity, etc. There's also a rectangle light and a skylight. These are just kind of more specific lights. They work, you know, in similar ways. The rectangle obviously just is going to fill up a rectangle. The sky has some other built-in stuff. We already have a sky here, but it's got some stuff that makes it act more like the sky and less like just a regular light. We won't go into that right now. Take my class next semester if you want to learn more about that. All right, so let's put our lights into our lighting folder. And now we're gonna add an object into the scene. So we looked at importing the standard assets. That's pretty easy. We just take the standard assets and they show up in our content area, and we have our starter content, etc. So if we want to add our own content, like if you were going to add an image from Google, or if you were going to add a song from freesound.org or something like that, we can do the same thing with 3D models. We just have to save them and then import them. So there's a couple steps to the process. So I'm going to save this scene and go back to the Finder. And so in Unreal, I'm going to go into my project and go to Content. And I'm going to make a new folder here called My Models, just so that I can kind of differentiate what I've created from what was already there. So I'm going to create a new folder, call this My Models. And I'm just going to download a model and throw it in here, and we'll talk about the process a little bit. So as we do this, let's keep in mind that we don't want our project to be, 20 gigabytes. We want to keep it to a relatively low size if we can. So let's look at the project size right now. If I inspect the project by hitting Command I on the Mac and look at the properties, you can see the whole project right now is 3 gigabytes. That sounds like a lot, but if we look at the actual content, it's not quite as bad. So if I go into the content and then look, the content is only 195 megabytes. It's still a lot, but for a 3D game, that's not that crazy. A lot of what is taking up that space is cached stuff. So if we look at the saved folder, that's 3 gigabytes. So as the engine is rendering stuff out, it's making these big cache files to make it faster to render stuff as we're working. So a lot of that is what's in there, and that stuff won't be added in the game when we export it. So we're not as much worried about the whole project size as we are about the content size. The content size is what's really important. So our content is like 200 megabytes. And if we look in here, like my levels are very small because it's just data about where to put content. The thing that takes up a lot of space are things like, let's look at our first person, and let's look at, let's look at our first person arms. So those are just the arms that render the first person that you see when you jump and stuff like that. That's 150 megabytes. So that's actually most of our content right there is just the arms for this character. So if we look at, there's some animations, that's not that big. But the materials are actually not that big. The mesh assets are not that big. The textures is where a lot of that data is. So the textures are images that, determine the model. So that's actually a lot of what our content is right now. The starter content is only 4 megabytes. That's not that crazy. So we just want to keep track of how much space everything takes up as we build the game. So let's add a model. So I'm going to go over to Google, and I'm going to go to Sketchfab. Sketchfab is just one of many websites where you can download 3D models there's a lot of resources, just like there are for images and textures and all sorts of other stuff. Sketchfab is a good one. There's lots of other stuff out there, so you can find stuff in various places. But the nice thing about Sketchfab, or a nice thing about Sketchfab, is that we can search for specific types of models, and we can also get free models. So, make sure to look at the license before you use a model, especially if you plan to work with this game outside of class. You always want to make sure that you're using content that is licensed for other people to use it. Or obviously, if you buy models, then usually you're buying a license as well. So you also want to make stuff that matches the theme of the game. So let's imagine, even though it doesn't really look like it right now, let's imagine that I'm making a zoo. So I'm going to go to the animals and pets area. So I'll go to explore, go to animals and pets. And so I can restrict what I see here by license. So it shows me a bunch of different licenses. If I want to be have the most freedom, I can go with CC0. Although there's nothing in CC0. So let's try CC BY, which means I have to give attribution. There's some interesting models in here, but there's some dinosaurs. Those are pretty cool. There's some sharks, some birds. So you can see there's a pretty wide variety of types of models and, quality of models. But there's some interesting stuff in here. Let's ignore that. Let's turn this one off. No derivatives, no commercial. Okay, we can do no commercial. There's some pretty funny stuff in here. There's some animal bones and some shells. Let's see what else is it. Maybe we'll try free standard. Let's see. Okay, there's some Minecraft characters. Okay, there's a lot of crazy stuff here. All right. Okay. Let's just find something. Okay. Why don't we go with that moose? That moose is pretty nice. So in Sketchfab, we can preview the model. This looks pretty cool. And then we can download different versions of the model. So when we go to download the 3D model, you're going to see some more information about the license. So this is CCNC, which means that we can't use it in a commercial product. So if you wanted to sell your game, you wouldn't be allowed to use this model. Then it's going to give us some different options for the file type. Unreal, you can pretty much use whatever. I would just go with whatever is kind of the smallest file size. If you try to import it into Unreal and it doesn't work, then you can try a different one. But most of these should work. So FBX is pretty standard, but you can see the file size is pretty large. GLTF is also a more recent standard. That file size is 1 megabyte. It's pretty reasonable. GLB is similar to GLTF, but it uses binaries. That file size is 1 megabyte, so it's kind of the same. USDZ, I forget what that stands for. Universal Scene Description. Okay, so that's the smallest one. I'm actually going to go with the GLTF just because that's a format that I'm pretty familiar with. So I'm going to download that. And then we'll take a look at that. So that's going to be in my downloads folder. So I'm going to open another window and go to downloads, and I'm going to get this moose.zip. So let's open that up. And in here, you're going to see a bunch of stuff. So there's a GLTF file, and then there's a bin file, there's a license, and there's some textures. And so we want to make sure when we import this into our game that this setup doesn't change. So the way that most 3D files work is they're going to reference some textures, which are just images that have the data that we use to render the material. And we don't want to lose those. So usually what I will do is just take the folder and drop it in there like that. And we can just delete this zip folder. So when we unzip the compressed folder, it's actually going to change file size. So let's take a look at how big this is. So the actual real file size is 2.1 megabytes, even though the downloadable size was 1 megabyte. So when you compress a file, it makes everything a little bit smaller. So you want to double check after you uncompress it that it doesn't get like way bigger. And we just want to make sure that all of these guys stay in the same place. We don't want to move them around or change the name because it'll probably break the references. Okay, so now we've got this Moose folder in here. That's great. And you might think that when we go over to Unreal, you'll be able to see it, but we're not going to. So let's go back to Unreal. Let's go to our content drawer. And let's take a look in here. I need to make this a little larger. So we actually don't see that folder that I created. In Godot, it would automatically import it. In Unreal, that's not the case. So what we need to do is import it ourselves. So we just click the import button here, and then we can go to my models and go to Moose, and we can import from here. And let's just click open there. And I think it's gonna import everything else, but let's just click import and see what happens. Okay, everything is, so it did import everything, but it's not exactly the way I want it to be. So let's see, if I hit Control Z, no, that's not gonna work. Okay, so let's actually just delete these files. We don't want them to be unorganized like this. So I'm just gonna delete these. Okay, so we want to make sure to keep the same organization. So let's see if we can just drag and drop. I don't know if that'll work, but it's worth a shot. No, it won't let us. Okay, so let's recreate the folder structure. So let's make a new folder and call this My Models. And then let's go in here and call this Moose. And uh-oh, I made this in my starter content. Whoops, okay. So be careful where you're putting it. I accidentally put my models in starter content. Let's delete that. Okay, let's try it again. Let's go to content. And I'm gonna make a new folder and call this My Models. And then I'll go in here and make another new folder called Moose. And now I'll import, what happened to my Moose? Oh, I know, I deleted it by mistake. Okay, whoops, let's cancel this. Let's see, maybe I can just import the zip file. Oh no, I deleted the zip file. Okay, let's go to my trash and find moose.zip, put it back in here. Oh, I put it, okay, I need to be a little more careful. I put it in applications by mistake. Okay, let's put it in downloads. Oh, now it's just a reference. Oh boy, okay. Let's undo that. Oh, geez. Oh, because if I put it in applications and then I move it, it's gonna think it's just a reference. Oh boy. Okay, let's just delete this and go back to our trash again and try this again. Okay, here's our Moose zip. Okay, let's unzip this. And now let's try importing it again. Okay. 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 So we're gonna import this. Okay, so now we've got all this stuff in here. And we should be able to put the moose in the scene. But there's a couple things that we want to check first. So it put them all into this moose folder. So that's okay. Let's see what it looks like in our file system. Okay. So it looks okay, even though we see it all here. All right. So let's try putting it into the scene, but one thing you're going to notice is all of these little files have this little asterisk next to them. So that means they're not actually saved, which means that they won't really load correctly. So there's a lot of them. So rather than go through and click on each one and hit Command S, what I can do is go to File and just go to Save All. Okay, so that should save everything. And so now we just got to find our moose here, and we're going to try to add it in. So let's add the moose into this room at the end here. So I'll throw this guy in there. Okay, he's pretty big, and he's missing his head. Okay. So here's his head. Okay. So we've got his head. The textures worked, so that's good. Usually, this would work a little bit better. Okay. So sometimes, this is a good example of, sometimes this doesn't work out exactly the way you want it to, or it's a little too complicated. I could recreate the moose if this was the only option that I had, but I think I'll be able to find a model that's easier to work with. So let's just delete this stuff. So I'm just gonna click on all this stuff and just delete it. And let's try a different model and see if we have better luck. So let's try maybe the GLB. So that's a binary version of the moose. Let's delete this extra stuff and go to downloads. And so we have moose.glb. This is just one file, and it's already 2.1 megabytes. So maybe this will be a little bit easier to use. Let's get rid of these other files. So we'll use this GLB file. Let's see how that goes. So I'm going to go to import and import the GLB and click import. Oh, and it does the exact same thing. Okay. So this looks the same. All right, let's save all, and let's put my moose in here. Oh, if I put them all in together, then it actually lines them up for me. So if I throw them all in at the same time, then the moose actually looks fine. So let's throw my moose over here, and we can put these together in a little levels thing. Okay. So here's my little moose guy. So I've got the moose body, the moose face. Oh, that's the old moose face. Let's delete that. Moose face, moose horns. Oh, and the old body. Okay, so I've got my 3 parts of my moose. Let's go ahead and turn that into a little level. So I'm gonna right click on that and go to level and create level instance. Click OK. And I'll put this in the moose folder. Oh, and let's call it not new map, but moose scene. Oh, whoops. Let's rename this. Okay. I'm outside of my... Let's go back to my level 1. Okay, so here's my moose. I've got this moose scene. I'm gonna rename this instance. And so now with this one, we can move it around. We might want to scale the moose down a little bit. And we can place it in this scene. And there we go. So this is actually, even though this wasn't the smoothest example, that's probably good because it's probably more reflective of what you will run into when you're trying to load models into your scene. I also need to turn the snapping off to get him exactly where I want him. But yeah, when you're importing models, sometimes you'll run into issues. You may want to try a different file. you may want to, try different stuff. But here we go. There's my moose model, and it's got my new lighting, and yeah, it's got some. What's his preview on it? So I'll see what's up with that, but that's the basic idea. So you can look for models in different places and download them, but you need to import them using the import button. You can't just like throw them into your project folder. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here.